The Texas sun beat down on what used to be Jake Morrison's pride and joy. Cracked earth stretched as far as his eyes could see, and the empty water troughs mocked him with their dry, splintered wood.
Fresh
He
and
stood at the
cool.
edge of his
It's
property,
lovely.
his tall frame
Perfect for a
casting a
drink.
long
Yes,
shadow across
please.
the barren land. At 6'4", he'd always been bigger than most men, but lately he felt small, powerless. The year was 1887, and Texas had been dying for 3 years straight. No rain, no relief, just endless blue sky and merciless heat that sucked the life from everything it touched. Jake ran a calloused hand through his dark hair, now streaked with premature gray at the temples. His blue eyes, once bright with dreams, had grown dull and tired. He hadn't looked at himself in a mirror in months. Didn't see the point. There was no one to look good for anymore. 2 years ago, his wife Sarah had died giving birth to their stillborn son. The baby never drew breath. Sarah screamed for 18 hours before the fever took her. Jake had held her hand through it all, helpless, watching the light fade from her eyes. The doctor never came. There was no doctor within 50 miles, and by the time Jake rode to fetch one, it was too late. He'd buried them both on the hill overlooking the ranch under a cottonwood tree that had since withered and died in the drought. 1 year ago, the drought began in earnest. What little cattle he had left deed or had to be sold for pennies. The wells ran dry, the grass turned to dust, and now at 34 years old, Jake had nothing left but debt and the ghosts of better days. The bank had given him until the end of the month. 3 weeks. 3 weeks to come up with $2,000 he didn't have or lose the land his father had died defending during the war. Jake's father had been a Union soldier, one of the few Texans who sided with the North. He'd taken a Confederate bullet in '63, defending a position that didn't matter anymore. But before he died, he'd made Jake promise to hold on to the land, to build something lasting, to create the family and legacy he'd never gotten to see. For 11 years, Jake had kept that promise. He'd married Sarah, started a herd, built a home, and then it all crumbled like the dried earth beneath his boots. The sound of a carriage approaching made him turn. Dust rose in a cloud behind an elegant black coach, completely out of place in this dying corner of Texas. Jake frowned. No one came out here anymore. Not the neighbors who'd already lost their own ranches. Not the townspeople who whispered about him behind his back, calling him cursed, saying that everything Jake Morrison touched turned to dust and death. The carriage rolled to a stop about 20 yards from where he stood, and Jake's frown deepened when he saw the quality of the horses. These weren't working animals. These were expensive, well-fed, glossy creatures that had no business in drought country. Each one probably ate better than most ranchers around here. The driver, a thin man in a dark suit, climbed down and opened the door. A woman stepped out before the driver could assist her. Jake's breath caught. She was beautiful, but not in the delicate way Sarah had been. This woman looked to be about 28 years old with rich auburn hair swept up beneath a fashionable hat. Her dress was dark green silk cut in the latest Eastern style and probably cost more than his entire herd had been worth before the drought killed them. But it was her eyes that stopped him. Green as spring grass and filled with something he couldn't quite name. Determination, maybe, or desperation disguised as dignity. She looked directly at him, seemed to measure him with that steady gaze, then walked forward with careful steps. Her shoes weren't made for Texas dirt. Everything about her screamed money and eastern cities and a world Jake had never wanted any part of. Sheriff Warren's horse appeared behind the carriage, and Jake's confusion deepened. Warren was a fair man, respected, not the type to make social calls during a drought. Something was wrong here. The woman stopped about 10 feet away, close enough to speak without shouting, far enough to maintain propriety. Up close, Jake could see the fine lines of worry around her eyes, the tension in her shoulders despite her straight posture. This was a woman trying very hard to appear in control. "Mr. Morrison," she said. Her voice was cultured, confident, with the crisp diction of someone educated back east. "My name is Catherine Abbott. I've come about Sweetwater Springs." Jake blinked. Sweetwater Springs. Richard Thornton's ranch. The only property in the territory that still had water blessed with 3 natural springs that had never run dry. Jake had known Richard slightly, a kind man older who'd bought the place 5 years back to retire in peace. But Jake hadn't seen him in months. "Richard sent you," Jake asked, his voice rougher than intended. He didn't talk much these days. Something flickered across Catherine's face. Pain, maybe. She glanced at Sheriff Warren, who dismounted and stood a respectful distance back, then returned her attention to Jake. "Mr. Thornton passed away 3 weeks ago," she said quietly. "Fever. It took him quickly." Jake felt a stab of guilt. He should have checked on his neighbor. Should have ridden over when he noticed the place seemed quiet. But he'd been too wrapped up in his own misery, his own failing ranch, to think about anyone else. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. "Richard was a good man." "You knew him?" Catherine asked. "Not well. We'd talk sometimes when our paths crossed. He helped me once when a fence broke. I helped him fix a wagon wheel." Jake paused, confusion returning. "But I don't understand what this has to do with me, Miss Abbott." "Mrs." she corrected automatically, then caught herself. "Or rather, I was supposed to be Mrs. Thornton. I'm a mail-order bride, Mr. Morrison. Richard and I corresponded for 6 months. He proposed marriage by letter. I accepted. I left Boston 3 weeks ago to come here and marry him." Understanding dawned cold and heavy in Jake's gut. "But he died before you arrived." "Yes." Catherine's composure cracked slightly. Her hands, which had been clasped in front of her, tightened until the knuckles went white. "I stepped off the train this morning, electing to meet my future husband. Instead, Sheriff Warren informed me that Richard had been buried 2 weeks ago." Warren stepped forward now, his weathered face sympathetic. "Morrison, we've got a situation here. Richard's will left everything to his wife, Catherine Abbott, but they never married. The legal status is murky. And my neighbor, Mr. Hutchkins, is contesting the will." Catherine added, her voice hardening with anger. "He claims I'm a fraud, a gold digger who showed up to claim property that doesn't belong to me." Jake knew Hutchkins, knew him, and didn't like him. The man owned the land between Sweetwater Springs and the river. He'd tried to buy Richard's place multiple times, always offering more money than it was worth. The reason was obvious to anyone who understood the territory. Control the water, control everything. In a drought, water was more valuable than gold. "Hutchkins wants the springs," Jake said. "Yes," Warren confirmed, "but Richard's will is clear, even if unconventional. He left everything to Catherine Abbott, described as his future wife. His intentions were obvious." "But intentions don't equal legality," Catherine said bitterly. "The judge won't rule for another 2 weeks. Until then, I'm staying at Sweetwater Springs, but I can't manage it alone. I don't know the first thing about ranching. I grew up in Boston. My father was a banker. The most I knew about livestock was which butcher to send the cook to." She took a breath, steadying herself, then looked directly at Jake. "Sheriff Warren says you're the most honest man in the territory, that you know cattle and horses better than anyone, that you treat animals and people with respect. He also says you're about to lose your ranch to the bank." The bluntness stung, but Jake appreciated it more than he would have false sympathies. "That's all true. Then I'd like to propose a partnership," Catherine said. "You have experience and knowledge. I have water and resources. You manage the operations, I handle the finances. We split everything 50-50, equal partners in every sense." Jake stared at her, trying to understand the game. There had to be a game. Rich people didn't offer partnerships to broke cowboys out of kindness. Why what? Why offer this to me? You could hire any number of men. You could sell the ranch and go back to Boston. Why partner with a stranger? Catherine met his eyes, and Jake saw something raw and honest there. "Because I have nowhere else to go, Mr. Morrison. My father's bank failed. That's why I agreed to be a mail-order bride in the first place, to save my family from destitution. I gave up everything to come here. I can't go back. I have no money for a train ticket, no home to return to, no prospects. This ranch is all I have." She paused, emotion thick in her voice. "And Sheriff Warren says you're honest. Do you know how rare that is? How many men I've met who saw a woman alone and thought they could take advantage. I need someone I can trust, Mr. Morrison. Someone who will treat me as an equal partner, not a burden or an opportunity. In return, I can offer you a way to save yourself from ruin. We both need this. That's why." The honesty disarmed him. Jake had expected calculation, manipulation. Instead, he saw desperation that matched his own. Two people standing at the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to jump alone or together. Warren spoke up. "Morrison, I wouldn't suggest this if I didn't think it could work. The woman needs help. You need help. and Hutchins getting control of that water would be bad for everyone in the territory. Jake looked at his dying land, then at Catherine Abbott. She was watching him with those green eyes, trying to hide her fear, trying to look strong. Something in her expression reminded him of Sarah on their wedding day. Not the features, but the vulnerability masked by determination. The courage it took to trust a stranger with your future. 1 week, Jake heard himself say. I'll give you 1 week trial. If we can work together, we'll draw up a proper partnership. If not, we part ways with no hard feelings. Relief flooded Catherine's face so profound, it was almost painful to witness. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. You won't regret this. I hope not, ma'am. Jake extended his hand. And you can call me Jake. Catherine's hand was small and pale against his large, sun-darkened one, but her grip was firm. Then you must call me Catherine. We're partners now, after all. The contact lasted a moment longer than a business handshake should. Jake found himself noticing details he had no business noticing. The way afternoon light caught gold threads in her auburn hair. The sprinkle of freckles across her mouth that her powder couldn't quite hide. The fullness of her lower lip. The faint scent of lavender that clung to her despite the dust and heat. He dropped her hand like it had burned him and stepped back. I should see the ranch, assess what needs doing. Of course, Catherine turned to Warren. Sheriff, thank you for your help. I can manage from here. Warren tipped his hat. If you need anything, either of you send word. And Morrison, think about what I said. About making this legal and proper. After the sheriff rode off, Catherine climbed back into her carriage and directed the driver to follow Jake. He mounted his horse Dusty, the only animal he had left, and led the way toward Sweetwater Springs. It wasn't far, maybe 3 miles, but Jake rode slowly, trying to process what had just happened. An hour ago, he'd been contemplating which possessions to pack before the bank took everything. Now he was riding toward a partnership that might save him, or might be the worst mistake of his life. Sweetwater Springs appeared over a rise, and even in his complicated state of mind, Jake felt a pang of longing. The ranch was beautiful. Richard had chosen well. The main house was large, painted white with green shutters, though the paint was peeling and several shutters hung crooked. The barn was solid, built to last. And running through the property, visible even from a distance, was the creek fed by those 3 blessed springs. Clear water flowing abundant, a miracle in the middle of hell. Jake dismounted near the barn and waited while Catherine's carriage pulled up. She stepped down and the driver began unloading her trunk. I can pay him to stay and help with work, Catherine offered, gesturing to the driver. No need to waste money, Jake said. I can handle most repairs myself. You'll want to save funds for livestock and supplies. Catherine nodded, learning already. She paid the driver, who tipped his hat, and departed, leaving them alone. The silence stretched awkward for a moment. Would you like to see the house? Catherine asked. Barn first, Jake said. That's where the real work happens. The barn was in better shape than Jake's own had been. Solid construction, good roof, clean stalls. But it was empty. No horses except for a single old mare that had probably been Richard's. No cattle, no chickens, just empty space and potential. Richard sold most of his stock and before he got sick, Catherine explained, following Jake through the barn. He wasn't trying to run a real operation. He just wanted a quiet place to spend his final years. How old was he? Jake asked. 63, 20 years my senior. Catherine's voice held no emotion, just fact. Jake glanced at her. You would have married a man you'd never met who was old enough to be your father. Yes. Catherine met his gaze without flinching. Because the alternative was watching my father put a pistol to his head when the creditors came. Because my mother was already ill with worry, and I couldn't bear to see her decline further. Because sometimes, Mr. Morrison, we do things not because we want to, but because we must. The honesty again. Jake found himself respecting her more than he'd expected. I understand that. Did you love him, Richard? I never met him. How could I love him? Catherine turned away, running her hand along a stall door. But I respected him from his letters. He was kind, thoughtful. He wrote about his dreams for this place, about wanting someone to share it with. He never pretended it was a love match. He was honest about what he could offer and what he hoped to receive in return. Companionship, respect, partnership. She looked back at Jake. That's what I'm offering you now. Not love or romance, just partnership. Two people working together because alone will both fail. Jake nodded slowly. The terms were clear. Good. He didn't want complications. Didn't want to feel anything beyond the professional. His heart was buried on that hill with Sarah and their son, and he intended to keep it there. Let's walk the property, he said. I need to see the water, check the fencing, figure out what we're working with. They spent the next 2 hours surveying Sweetwater Springs. Jake took mental notes of everything that needed repair or improvement. The fencing was adequate but could be stronger. The grazing land was good, better than good, still holding some green despite the drought, thanks to the creek that ran through it. The 3 springs themselves were remarkable, bubbling up from deep underground, cold and clear and constant. This water could support 200 head of cattle, Jake said, kneeling by the largest spring. Maybe more. With proper management, this could be one of the most profitable ranches in the territory. Then let's make it that, Catherine said. She'd followed him the entire walk, never complaining about the heat or the distance, asking intelligent questions about fencing and grazing rotation and water rights. She was learning fast, absorbing every word Jake said. It'll take money, Jake warned. We'll need to buy cattle hire hands, repair infrastructure, and we'll need to do it before Hutchkins can find a way to take this from you. How much money? Jake did the calculations in his head. To do it right, at least $3,000. Maybe more. Catherine didn't even blink. I have $4,000 in a bank account in Boston. I can wire for it. Jake's jaw tightened. $4,000. More money than he'd ever seen in his life. And she talked about it like it was nothing. The gulf between their worlds felt suddenly enormous. Must be nice, he said more bitterly than he intended. Having that kind of money. Catherine's eyes flashed. Is it nice to know that money is all that's left of my father's entire life's work? That he built his bank over 30 years only to lose everything when larger banks decided to squeeze him out? That he died of a heart attack 3 weeks after declaring bankruptcy, and I couldn't even attend his funeral because I was on a train to marry a stranger? Her voice broke. Don't presume to know what my money cost me, Mr. Morrison. Every dollar represents something lost. Someone I loved. A life I'll never get back. Jake felt like he'd been slapped. I'm sorry. That was wrong of me. Catherine turned away, composing herself. When she spoke again, her voice was steady. We've both lost things. Let's focus on what we can build, not what's behind us. Agreed. They walked back to the main house in silence. The sun was lowering, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, beautiful and terrible like everything in Texas. Catherine paused at the porch steps. There's a foreman's cabin out back, she said. It's small but clean. You are welcome to stay there, unless you'd prefer to ride back to your ranch each day. Jake thought about his empty house full of ghosts and memories. The cabin would be fine. I'll need to go back tomorrow, collect my things. Figure out what to do with the place before the bank takes it. Perhaps we can buy your ranch, Catherine suggested. Add it to our holdings. With what water the wells are dry. For now, but droughts end, and when they do, having more land will be valuable. Jake considered it. The idea of keeping his father's land, even if he didn't own it outright, held appeal. We can discuss it after we see if this partnership works. Fair enough. Catherine opened the front door. I should warn you, I'm a terrible cook. Richard's housekeeper left when he died. I've been trying to manage on my own, but the results have been disastrous. Despite everything, Jake felt his lips twitch toward a smile. I've been cooking for myself for 2 years. I won't starve. Would you join me for dinner anyway? Catherine asked. I know we're just business partners, but I'd appreciate the company. It's been a long day, and eating alone in this big house is rather depressing. Jake wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain distance, but the hope in her eyes, barely visible beneath her careful composure, made him nod. What time? 7 o'clock. I'll be there. Jake spent the next hour settling into the foreman's cabin. It was indeed small, just one room with a bed, table, stove, and not much else. But it was clean and solid, and the roof didn't leak. More than he'd hoped for. He unpacked the few belongings he'd brought, mostly work clothes and a spare pair of boots. Everything he owned fit in one saddlebag. It was pathetic, really, but also freeing in a strange way. Nothing left to lose meant nothing holding him back. At 7, he walked to the main house. Catherine had changed from her traveling dress into something simpler, though still far finer than anything Sarah had ever owned. The dining room table was set with china that looked expensive and fragile, two places across from each other. The meal was as Catherine had warned, not good. The steak was tough, the potatoes were burned, and the biscuits could have doubled as ammunition. But Jake ate every bite without complaint, and Catherine's embarrassed laughter when he struggled through a particularly hard biscuit made the meal almost pleasant. "I'm sorry," she said, pushing food around her plate. "I grew up with servants. My mother tried to teach me basic skills, but I never paid attention. I thought I'd always have cooks and maids. Foolish of me." "It's edible," Jake offered it. "That's more than some cowboys can manage." "You're being kind." "No, I'm being honest. If I didn't like it, I wouldn't eat it. I don't lie, Catherine." She looked up at him, studying his face. "I believe you. That's refreshing. Most people lie all the time about little things to be polite or avoid conflict. Lying takes too much effort. Truth is simpler." They ate in silence for a moment, then Catherine spoke again. "Tell me about your ranch. What was it like before the drought?" The question pierced something in Jake's chest. He set down his fork, trying to find words for what had been lost. "It was good. My father built it from nothing. After he died in the war, I took over. I was 19 years old and thought I knew everything. Spent the next few years learning I knew nothing." He paused, memories flooding back. "Met Sarah when I was 23. She was the daughter of a shopkeeper in town. Prettiest girl I'd ever seen, with blonde hair and blue eyes and a laugh that made everything better. We got married 6 months after we met, started building our herd, planned to fill the house with children and noise and laughter." His voice roughened. "She got pregnant after we'd been married 2 years. We were so happy. So damn happy. But the pregnancy was hard on her. Doctor warned us it might be dangerous, but we wanted that baby so much. When she went into labor, it lasted 2 days. I rode for the doctor, but he was tending to Hutchinson's wife. Sick with the flu, he said. He'd come in the morning." Jake's hands clenched on the table. "Sarah died that night. The baby was already gone, had been for hours probably. If the doctor had come when I asked, maybe he could have saved her. Maybe not, but I'll never know." Catherine's hand covered his before he realized she'd moved. Her touch was gentle, warm. "I'm so sorry, Jake." He stared at their joined hands. He should pull away, should maintain professional distance. But he'd been so alone for so long, and her touch felt like absolution for sins he couldn't name. "Your husband," he said quietly. "Richard. You said you never met him, but you still came all this way. That took courage." Catherine's hand stiffened slightly, but didn't withdraw. "Or desperation. I'm not sure there's much difference sometimes." "There is. Desperation makes you reckless. Courage makes you strong." She smiled sadly. "Then I suppose I'm both. Desperately courageous or courageously desperate." They sat like that for a long moment, hands touching across the table, two damaged souls finding unexpected connection. Finally, Catherine pulled back, though slowly, as if reluctant. "I should let you get some rest," she said. "Tomorrow we can start making plans, decide what to prioritize." Jake stood as well, his height making the dining room feel suddenly smaller. "Catherine, thank you for the opportunity. I won't let you down." Her smile was soft, genuine. "I know you won't, Jake. And thank you for taking a chance on a woman you just met. I know that couldn't have been easy." As Jake walked back to the cabin under a sky full of stars, he realized something had shifted. When he'd woken up this morning, he'd been ready to give up, ready to let the bank take everything and maybe put a bullet in his head to end the misery. Now, for the first time in 2 years, he felt something other than despair. Not quite hope, not yet, but the possibility of hope. The sense that maybe, just maybe, there was a reason to keep fighting. He lay in the narrow bed staring at the ceiling and thought about Catherine Abbott, the way she'd stood straight despite her fear, the intelligence in her questions about the ranch, the pain in her voice when she spoke of her father, the warmth of her hand on his. This was dangerous territory. She was his partner, his business associate, nothing more. He couldn't afford to feel anything beyond professional respect. His heart was buried with Sarah. It had to stay buried. But as he drifted towards sleep, his last thought was of green eyes full of determination and hope, and a voice that said partnership, with the conviction of someone who'd never had an equal before. Tomorrow they would start building something new. Tonight, for the first time in years, Jake Morrison went to sleep without wanting to wake up dead. The first week passed in a blur of hard work and careful navigation. Jake threw himself into evaluating Sweetwater Springs with the intensity of a man who'd been given one last chance at redemption. He rose before dawn each morning, checked the springs, walked the fence lines, and made detailed lists of everything that needed repair or replacement. Catherine matched him step for step, asking questions that showed she was actually listening, actually learning. On the third morning, Jake found her in the barn wearing a practical cotton dress instead of her silk finery, holding a hammer, and staring at a broken stall door with fierce determination. "Need help?" he asked. Catherine jumped, then laughed at herself. "I'm trying to fix this. The wood is splintered here, and I thought if I just nailed it back together, but the nails keep bending." Jake examined her work. She'd chosen nails that were too thin and was hitting them at the wrong angle. But she'd tried. That counted for something. "Here," he said, moving beside her. "Hold the nail steady, straight up and down, then hit it firm but not too hard. Let the hammer's weight do the work." He guided her hand, showing her the motion. Catherine bit her lip in concentration, then swung. The nail went in clean. Her face lit up with such pure joy that Jake felt something twist in his chest. "I did it," she said. "That's the first thing I've ever fixed with my own hands." "Good work." Jake stepped back, needing distance from her warmth, her proximity. "Practice on a few more. I'll be checking the north fence." He walked away before she could respond, before he could do something stupid like smile back at her enthusiasm. This was business. Just business. But that afternoon, when they reviewed the property assessment together, Jake found himself explaining things more thoroughly than necessary. Showing her how to read the land, how to judge good grazing territory, how to estimate water needs for different herd sizes. And Catherine absorbed it all, taking notes in a leather journal with handwriting more elegant than any woman he'd known. "You're a natural at this," he said without thinking. Catherine looked up surprised. "At ranching, I can barely hammer a nail straight." "At learning, at asking the right questions. That's more important than knowing how to rope a steer." Jake paused. "Most women I've met either pretend to understand when they don't or refuse to try because it's not ladylike. You just want to know how things work." "Is that strange?" "No, it's refreshing." Pink colored her cheeks, and she looked back down at her journal. "Thank you. I've always been curious, but in Boston society that was considered unbecoming. A woman should be decorative, not inquisitive." "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard." Catherine laughed, a real laugh that transformed her whole face. "I think I'm going to like Texas Jake Morrison. At least hear people say what they mean." On the fifth day, they rode into town to buy supplies and inquire about purchasing cattle. The general store was run by a shrewd woman named Harriet Cooper, who took one look at Jake and Catherine together and raised her eyebrows so high they nearly disappeared into her hairline. "Well, Morrison," Harriet said, "heard you were working with the widow Thornton. Didn't realize it was quite so cozy." Jake felt his jaw tighten. "We're business partners, Mrs. Cooper. Nothing cozy about it." Of course, of course." Harriet's tone suggested she didn't believe a word. "And what can I get for you fine business partners today?" Catherine stepped forward, her voice cool and professional. "We need supplies for fence repair, feed for horses, and information about local cattle auctions. Can you help with that, or should we take our money elsewhere?" Harriet's eyes narrowed, but she was too good a businesswoman to turn away cash customers. "Auction Saturday at the Morrison place." "Oh, wait. Oh, that's your old ranch, isn't it, Jake? Guess the bank's selling off the land and whatever's left." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. His ranch, his father's legacy, being auctioned off to strangers. He'd known it was coming, but hearing it stated so baldly made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Catherine's hand found his arm, steadying. "We'll need directions to the auction, and the supplies I mentioned, please." After they'd loaded their purchases into the wagon Catherine had bought, Jake sat on the bench seat and stared at nothing. Catherine climbed up beside him, but didn't immediately signal the horses to move. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "about your ranch. It's done, no point mourning it. There's always a point in mourning what we've lost. That's what makes us human." Catherine turned to face him. "Jake, I meant what I said before. If we can afford it, we should buy your property. Keep it in our partnership. Why would you do that? It's worthless without water. Because it matters to you. Because your father died for that land and you've bled for it. Because keeping it means something even if it's not immediately profitable. She paused. And because droughts do end eventually, when the rains come back, that land will be valuable again. Jake looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who'd been in Texas less than a week, who could have taken her money and left, who owed him nothing. You'd spend your money on dead land for a man you barely know. I'd invest in our partnership's future. There's a difference. Catherine picked up the reins. Besides, you're not a man I barely know anymore, Jake. We've spent nearly every waking hour together for 5 days. I know you wake before sunrise and check the springs first thing. I know you talk to your horse like she understands every word. I know you drink your coffee black and hate beans, but eat them anyway because they're cheap. I know you carry guilt like other men carry pocket watches, they're always ticking away. So no, you're not a stranger anymore. She was right, and that terrified him, because Jake had learned things about her too, that she hummed when she thought no one was listening, that she was left-handed and self-conscious about it because her mother had tried to force her to use her right, that she was stubborn and proud and refused to admit when she was tired or hurting, that her laugh when genuine was the most beautiful sound he'd heard in years. We should get back, he said, because he didn't know what else to say. The ride back to Sweetwater Springs was quiet but not uncomfortable. Jake found himself hyper-aware of Catherine beside him, the way her shoulder occasionally bumped his. When the wagon hit a rut, the scent of lavender that always seemed to cling to her despite the dust and sweat of ranch work. When they arrived, Miguel Santos was waiting by the barn. Miguel was a vaquero Jake had worked with years ago, a skilled horseman and one of the few people Jake still trusted. Seeing him was a surprise and a relief. Miguel, Jake said, climbing down from the wagon. What brings you out here? Miguel removed his hat, his weathered face serious. Heard you were working this ranch, amigo. Thought you might need help. I got no work since the Ramirez place went under. Jake glanced at Catherine, who nodded. We could use another hand. What are your wages? $20 a month, food, and a place to sleep. That's fair. You're hired. Catherine extended her hand, and after a moment of surprise, Miguel shook it. You the boss lady? Miguel asked. I'm one of them. Jake and I are partners. Miguel's face showed nothing, but Jake knew him well enough to see the questions behind his eyes. They'd talk later in private. For now, Jake showed Miguel to the bunkhouse and explained what work needed doing. That evening, Catherine insisted on attempting dinner again. The results were marginally better than before, though the chicken was still dry and the vegetables overcooked. But she'd made an effort, and Jake appreciated it more than he could say. Miguel seems capable, Catherine said as they ate. He's one of the best horsemen I've ever seen. You made a good hire. We made a good hire. Catherine set down her fork. Jake, I need you to stop doing that. Doing what? Acting like I'm the owner and you're just the hired help. We're partners, equal partners. That means we both make decisions, we both take credit, we both share responsibility. Her green eyes were intense. I know I'm a woman and I know that makes people uncomfortable. But I need you to believe I'm capable of this. If you don't believe it, no one else will either. Jake thought about the trail bosses he'd worked under, the men who'd taught him everything he knew about cattle and horses and survival. None of them had ever doubted his abilities because of who he was. They judged him on his work, his character, his willingness to learn. You're right, he said. I apologize. Old habits. Most women I've known wanted to be protected, not challenged. I'm not most women. No, you're not. Jake met her gaze. You're tougher than half the cowboys I've ridden with and smarter than most of the ranchers I've met. I won't forget again. Catherine's smile was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. Thank you. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Jake didn't want to name. He stood abruptly. I should check on Miguel, make sure he's settled in. But as he walked toward the bunkhouse, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't just a business arrangement anymore. Somewhere in the past 5 days, Catherine had stopped being just a partner and started being something more. Someone whose opinion mattered, whose smile made his day better, whose presence filled spaces in his life he hadn't realized were empty. And that scared him more than losing his ranch ever had. Saturday arrived too quickly. Jake, Catherine, and Miguel rode to the auction together, Catherine insisting on attending, despite Jake's suggestion that it might be too painful for him. She was right as usual. Having her beside him made it bearable when he saw his childhood home with a bank notice nailed to the door, and strange men walking through rooms where his mother had cooked and his father had taught him to read. The auctioneer was a thin man with a voice that carried. He stood on the porch and called out descriptions of the property while potential buyers examined the land, the barn, the house. Jake felt each word like a knife. 160 acres, good grazing. When there's rain, solid structures, well-built barn. Opening bid $500. Silence. No one wanted drought land. 400, more silence. Jake felt Catherine shift beside him. $300 for the whole property, folks. That's less than $2 an acre. A rancher Jake vaguely recognized raised his hand. 200. The auctioneer looked pained. Sir, this is quality land. 200 is robbery. 200 or nothing. Look at it. Dry as bone. Might never recover. Before Jake could process what was happening, Catherine's hands shot up. $500. Every head turned. The auctioneer looked delighted. We have 500. Do I hear 550? The other rancher glared at Catherine. Wish a 25. 600, Catherine said calmly. Ma'am, that's more than the opening bid. I'm aware, $600 for the property, and I'll pay cash today. The rancher swore and stalked off. The auctioneer grinned. Sold to the lady for $600. Come settle up, ma'am. Jake followed Catherine in a daze as she paid cash from a leather satchel, signed papers, received the deed. His ranch. She just bought his ranch without even discussing it with him first. Outside, he caught her arm. Catherine, you can't just spend $600 without talking to me first. Why not? It's our partnership's money invested in our partnership's future. She looked at him challenging. Or do you want me to ask permission like a child before every decision? No, but $600 on dead land is risky. So is every investment. But this land meant something to you, Jake. It was worth the risk. She pressed the deed into his hands. Besides, it's in both our names now, half yours, half mine. Equal partners, remember. Jake looked down at the paper, saw both their names listed as owners. Something in his chest cracked open, something he'd kept locked tight since Sarah died. Catherine had just given him back a piece of his past, transformed it into part of their shared future. The gesture was so generous, so unexpected, he didn't have words. Thank you, he managed. I don't know what else to say. You don't have to say anything. Catherine smiled. Just promise me we'll make something good here. Together. I promise. They rode back to Sweetwater Springs in comfortable silence, Miguel following at a respectful distance. But when they crested the final hill and saw the ranch spread below them, Jake noticed something wrong. Smoke. Not a lot, but enough. And horses he didn't recognize tied near the barn. Stay behind me, Jake said, reaching for the rifle under the wagon seat. Catherine grabbed his wrist. We go together, equal partners, remember. They approached cautiously. 3 men stood near the barn, and Jake recognized one of them immediately. Hutchkins. The other 2 were ranch hands, probably hired muscle. They looked up as the wagon approached, and Hutchkins smiled like a cat that had cornered a mouse. Morrison, Hutchkins said. Mrs. Thornton. What a pleasant surprise. Jake climbed down, putting himself between Hutchkins and Catherine. What are you doing on our property? Just inspecting what might soon be mine. The judge rules next week, you know, and I have excellent lawyers. Hutchkins' eyes slid to Catherine. I hope you enjoyed your little adventure in ranching, my dear. But reality is about to set in. Catherine stepped around Jake, her chin high. Reality is that this ranch is legally mine until a judge says otherwise. And you're trespassing. Trespassing, I'm a concerned neighbor checking on property that's been neglected. The only thing neglected here is your manners. Catherine's voice could have frozen water. You have 2 minutes to leave, or I'll ride to town and fetch Sheriff Warren. Hutchkins laughed. You'd have him arrest me on what charge? Trespassing, harassment, and whatever else the sheriff can think of. I'm sure he'll be creative. The tension stretched tight as a wire. Jake's hand stayed near his gun, watching the 2 hired men for any sudden moves. Miguel had positioned himself to Jake's left, cutting off one angle of approach. Hutchkins' smile faded. You're making a mistake, Mrs. Thornton. I'm offering you a graceful way out. Sell me this ranch now before the judge rules against you. I'll give you fair market value. You can go back east, start over somewhere civilized. I am civilized, Mr. Hutchins, which is why I'm giving you 1 minute to leave before I stop being polite. Something dangerous flashed in Hutchins' eyes. You're going to regret this. Both of you. He mounted his horse, his men following suit. But before riding off, he looked at Jake with something like pity. Morrison, you backing this woman is going to cost you everything. She's not worth it. Nothing but a mail-order bride who couldn't even make it to the altar before her husband died. What does that tell you? Jake's hand moved to his gun, but Catherine's voice stopped him. It tells me, Catherine said, her voice steady despite the color in her cheeks, that Richard Thornton was a better man than you'll ever be. He saw value in partnership and respect. You only see opportunities to exploit. Now leave before I decide I'm not civilized after all. Hutchins spurred his horse and rode off, his men following. But the threat hung in the air like smoke. Miguel spoke first. That man is trouble, boss. I know, Jake said, still watching the dust cloud. He's going to come back, Catherine added quietly. And next time he might not just talk. Jake turned to her. I can handle Hutchins. We can handle him. Catherine looked at Jake, then at Miguel. Together. That's how partnerships work. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Hutchins' words, the venom in them, the threat. The man wanted this ranch badly enough to fight dirty, and fighting dirty meant Catherine could get hurt. Around midnight, Jake gave up on sleep and walked outside. He was surprised to find Catherine sitting on the porch steps wrapped in a shawl against the cool night air. Can't sleep either, she asked. Jake sat beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Thinking about Hutchins, about what he might try next. Me too. Catherine pulled the shawl tighter. I'm sorry, Jake. I didn't mean to drag you into a legal battle with a powerful man. You didn't drag me anywhere. I came willingly. But if I just sold the ranch like he wanted, you wouldn't be in danger. Jake turned to look at her profile in the moonlight. And where would you be on a train back to Boston to nothing and no one? Is that what you wanted? No, but I don't want you hurt because of me either. Then we're even because I don't want you hurt either. Jake paused, choosing his words carefully. Catherine, I need you to understand something. When I agreed to this partnership, I knew it came with risks. Hutchins was always going to be a problem. But for the first time in 2 years, I have something worth fighting for. Not just land or cattle, but a purpose. A future. You gave me that. Catherine turned to face him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. You gave me that too. Before I met you, I was just surviving. Going through motions because I didn't know what else to do. But working with you, building this ranch, learning and growing, it's the first time I've felt alive since my father died. They sat in silence, the words hanging between them. Jake knew he should go back to his cabin, maintain professional boundaries, but Catherine's presence was a warmth he didn't want to leave. Tell me about Sarah, Catherine said suddenly. Not how she died, how she lived, what made her happy. The request surprised him, but Jake found himself answering. She loved simple things, wildflowers, the sound of rain on the roof. She'd sing while doing chores, made up silly songs about the chickens in the garden. She was gentle with everything, couldn't even kill a spider without feeling guilty. He smiled at the memory. She used to say I was too serious, that I worried about everything too much. She'd make me dance with her in the kitchen for no reason, just because she felt like dancing. She made everything lighter somehow, made life feel less like a battle and more like an adventure. She sounds wonderful. She was, but she was also fragile. I knew it when I married her, but I loved her anyway. Thought I could protect her from everything. Jake's voice roughened. I was wrong. Catherine's hand found his in the darkness, squeezing gently. You can't protect people from life, Jake. You can only stand beside them while they live it. The wisdom in her words struck deep. Jake had spent 2 years blaming himself for Sarah's death, for not being able to save her. But Catherine was right. Sarah had chosen to get pregnant, knowing the risks. She'd chosen to stay on the ranch instead of moving to town. They'd been partners in those decisions, not master and servant. I've been carrying guilt for so long, he admitted. Don't know how to put it down. Then don't put it down all at once. Let it go piece by piece, day by day. Catherine's thumb brushed across his knuckles. And let someone help you carry it in the meantime. Jake looked at their joined hands, then at her face. In the moonlight, Catherine was ethereally beautiful, but it wasn't her beauty that moved him. It was her strength, her wisdom, the way she saw through his defenses to the hurt underneath and offered comfort without pity. I'm falling for you, he said before he could stop himself. And that scares me more than Hutchkins ever could. Catherine's breath caught. Jake, I know, it's too soon, too complicated. We're business partners. I'm still mourning Sarah. You're dealing with legal battles and learning to be a rancher. The timing is terrible. He stood needing distance. I shouldn't have said anything. No. Catherine stood too, closing the space between them. No, I'm glad you did, because I'm falling for you too, and I thought I was going crazy. Jake stared at her. You are. How could I not be? You're everything I never knew I wanted. Strong but gentle. Honest to a fault. You treat me like an equal when the rest of the world sees a helpless woman. You teach me things without making me feel stupid. You make me want to be braver. Work harder. Reach higher. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You make me believe I could be happy again. The space between them felt charged electric. Jake's hands moved to her shoulders, then slid to cup her face. Catherine's hands came up to rest on his chest right over his heart. He could feel it pounding, could see her pulse fluttering in her throat. This is a bad idea, he breathed. Terrible, she agreed. Jake lowered his head slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But Catherine rose on her toes to meet him halfway, and when their lips touched, it was like coming home and setting off on an adventure all at once. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, two people learning each other. But then Catherine made a small sound and pressed closer, and Jake's control shattered. He kissed her deeply, thoroughly, pouring 2 years of loneliness and longing into it. Catherine kissed him back with equal intensity, her fingers tangling in his hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jake rested his forehead against hers. What are we doing? I don't know, but I don't want to stop. Me either, but Catherine, if we do this, it changes everything. The partnership, our working relationship, everything. Maybe it needs to change. Catherine pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. Maybe we've been so focused on being partners that we miss the possibility of being something more. Jake wanted to agree, wanted to pull her back into his arms and damn the consequences. But doubts crowded in. What if it doesn't work? What if we try this and it fails? We'd lose the partnership, the ranch, everything we're building. What if it does work? Catherine countered. What if we could have both a partnership and a marriage that's real, built on respect and shared goals and actual feeling instead of convenience? Marriage. The word came out strangled. Catherine laughed nervously. Eventually, I'm not proposing right now, Jake. I'm just saying that falling for each other doesn't have to ruin what we have. It could make it stronger. She was right and terrifying and so damn brave. Jake pulled her close again, holding her against his chest, feeling her heart beat in time with his. I don't know how to do this. Don't know how to let myself feel again without being afraid I'll lose you. Then we learned together, like everything else we've done. Catherine's arms wrapped around his waist. One day at a time. No promises we can't keep, no expectations we can't meet. Just honest effort and hope. Hope, Jake repeated. I'd forgotten what that felt like. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other in the quiet Texas night. Finally, reluctantly, Jake stepped back. You should get some sleep. Big day tomorrow. What's tomorrow? We're going to church, together, letting the whole town see we're partners in every sense. Catherine smiled. That's going to cause talk. Let them talk. I'm done hiding what I feel. Jake kissed her forehead softly. Good night, Catherine. Good night, Jake. He walked back to his cabin, feeling lighter than he had in years, but also terrified, because now he had something to lose again. Someone to lose. And if Hutchkins or the drought or simple bad luck took Catherine from him, Jake wasn't sure he'd survive it a second time. But as he lay in bed, remembering the feel of her lips on his, the way she'd held him like he was precious, Jake decided the risk was worth it. Some things were worth fighting for, worth bleeding for, worth living for. Catherine Abbott, soon to be Catherine Morrison, if he had any say in it, was one of those things. Sunday morning dawned clear and hot like every morning in Texas for the past 3 years. Jake stood in front of the small mirrors in his cabin, attempting to make himself presentable for church. He'd borrowed a suit from the trunk Richard Thornton had left behind, and while it was a bit loose in the shoulders, it fit well enough. His hands trembled slightly as he worked the tie, and he had to start over twice before getting it right. He was nervous, actually nervous, like a boy courting a girl for the first time, not a 34-year-old widower who'd already been married once. But this felt different. Sarah had been easy, natural, like breathing. What he felt for Catherine was more complicated, deeper, shot through with fear and hope in equal measure. A knock on the cabin door interrupted his thoughts. Miguel stood outside, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday clothes. "Boss, I need to speak with you before we go to town." Jake gestured him inside. Miguel had never been one for small talk, so whatever this was, it was important. "I heard things yesterday," Miguel said without preamble. "At the saloon in town, Hutchkins is telling everyone that Mrs. Catherine is not really Richard's intended bride, that she's a confidence woman who came to steal the ranch." Jake's jaw tightened. "That's a damn lie. I know this, you know this, but the people, they listen to Hutchkins. He has money influence. And Mrs. Catherine, she is a stranger from the East." Miguel paused. "There is more. Hutchkins says he will prove to the judge that she has no legal right to the property, that when he wins, he will have her arrested for fraud. He can't do that. She has letters from Richard, the marriage contract, everything." "Maybe so, but Hutchkins, he does not play fair. You know this." Miguel looked Jake in the eye. "I think he will try to hurt her reputation, make the town turn against her. If she has no friends here, the judge will be more likely to rule in Hutchkins' favor." Jake had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made his blood run cold. Catherine was strong, but she was also vulnerable in ways she didn't fully understand. The frontier had its own rules, its own codes, and a woman alone was always at a disadvantage. "Then we make sure she's not alone," Jake said. "We show the town that she has people standing with her, that we're not just business partners, but a united front." Miguel nodded slowly. "This is good. But boss, there is something else you should know. People are talking about you and Mrs. Catherine, about how you live on the same property, how you are always together. They say it is not proper for an unmarried woman and man. We're business partners. I live in the foreman's cabin, she lives in the main house. Everything is appropriate. I know this, but people, they see what they want to see. And Hutchkins, he is making them see impropriety." Miguel shifted his weight. "I think maybe you need to make the situation more clear, more legal." Jake understood what Miguel was suggesting. Marriage, Ramon. The same solution. Reverend Reynolds had hinted at the same thought that had crossed Jake's mind 100 times since last night. But marriage was supposed to be about love, not strategy. And yet the practical part of him knew Miguel was right. If he and Catherine married, it would solve multiple problems at once. Legal standing for Catherine's claim to the ranch, social respectability, protection from Hutchkins' schemes. "I'll think about it," Jake said. "Don't think too long, amigo. Hutchkins, he does not wait." They rode to church together, Jake driving the wagon with Catherine beside him, Miguel following on horseback. Catherine wore a simple blue dress, modest and appropriate, with her auburn hair pinned up beneath a small hat. She looked beautiful and nervous, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "You'll be fine," Jake said quietly. "Just be yourself." "What if they hate me? What if Hutchkins has already poisoned everyone against me? Then they're fools, and we don't need their approval." Jake wanted to take her hand but maintained propriety. "But I don't think that'll happen. People are curious, not cruel. Give them a chance to know you." The church was a small, white building on the edge of town, its steeple visible for miles across the flat prairie. Wagons and horses were already gathered outside, families in their Sunday best, talking in clusters. Conversation died as Jake helped Catherine down from the wagon. Every eye turned toward them. Jake offered Catherine his arm, and she took it with only the slightest tremor in her fingers. They walked toward the church entrance with heads high, Miguel a respectful distance behind. The crowd parted for them like water around a stone. Sheriff Warren was the first to greet them, tipping his hat to Catherine. Mrs. Thornton, good to see you, Morrison. Sheriff, Catherine said, her voice steady. Thank you for your kindness the other day. Just doing my job, ma'am. Warren's eyes held approval. You settling in all right at Sweetwater Springs? Very well, thank you. Mr. Morrison has been an excellent partner. The word partner seemed to ripple through the watching crowd. Jake felt Catherine's hand tighten on his arm, but kept his expression neutral. Let them stare. Let them whisper. He wasn't ashamed of their arrangement. Reverend Samuel Reynolds appeared in the church doorway, his weathered face breaking into a genuine smile. Mrs. Thornton, what a pleasure to have you join us. And Morrison, good to see you back in God's house. Jake hadn't attended church since Sarah's funeral. Standing here now felt strange, but also right somehow, like closing one chapter and starting another. Thank you, Reverend, Catherine said. I hope we're not intruding. Intruding, my dear all are welcome in the Lord's house. Come, let me introduce you to some folks. Reynolds led them inside, and Jake was grateful for the Reverend's easy manner. He introduced Catherine to several families, including his wife Martha, a plump woman with kind eyes and a shrewd expression. Mrs. Thornton, Martha said, taking Catherine's hands in hers. I was so sorry to hear about Richard. He was a good man, and he spoke of you often in his final weeks. Said you were intelligent and brave, willing to take a chance on the frontier. Catherine's eyes misted. He was kind to say so. He was truthful to say so. I've watched you these past weeks, my dear. Saw you in town buying supplies, asking smart questions, not putting on airs. That takes courage. Martha glanced at Jake. And I see you found good help in Mr. Morrison here. The best, Catherine said, and the warmth in her voice made Jake's chest tighten. I couldn't manage without him. Well, we're glad you're here, both of you. Martha lowered her voice. Don't let the gossips bother you. Small towns thrive on talk, but most of it's just noise. The people who matter can see quality when it's in front of them. They took seats in the third pew, and Jake noticed the careful space Catherine maintained between them. Proper, respectable. But when the congregation rose to sing her, shoulder brushed his, and the brief contact sent warmth through him. Reverend Reynolds preached about perseverance through trials, about faith in the face of drought and hardship. His words resonated through the small church, and Jake found himself actually listening instead of just enduring the service as he'd done in the past. The Lord does not promise us easy lives, Reynolds said, his voice carrying conviction. But he promises to walk with us through the valleys. And sometimes when we've lost everything, that's when he gives us exactly what we need. Not what we expected, not what we planned for, but what we truly need. Jake's eyes met Catherine's, and he saw the same thought reflected in her green gaze. They hadn't expected each other, hadn't planned for this partnership that was becoming something more. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the best things in life were the ones you didn't see coming. After the service, the congregation gathered outside, and this time people approached Catherine with more warmth. Several ranchers asked Jake about the cattle market, including him naturally in conversation, which by extension included Catherine. She handled herself beautifully, asking intelligent questions, showing genuine interest in people's lives. Then Hutchkins arrived. He rode up with two men Jake didn't recognize, both wearing suits too fine for a country church. Lawyers, probably. Hutchkins dismounted with theatrical slowness, making sure everyone was watching. Reverend Reynolds, Hutchkins said loudly, forgive my tardiness. Business matters, you understand. Of course, Hutchkins. Reynolds' tone was polite but cool. Service just ended. Pity, I do enjoy your sermons. Hutchkins' eyes found Catherine, and his smile turned predatory. Ah, Mrs. Thornton. Or should I say Miss Abbott, I'm never quite sure of the proper address for a woman whose marital status is so ambiguous. Catherine's back straightened. Mrs. Thornton is correct, as you well know. Is it strange since no marriage actually took place? A technicality, perhaps, but the law does tend to focus on technicalities. Hutchkins gestured to his companions. These are my attorneys, by the way. From Dallas. We've been reviewing the case most thoroughly. Jake stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Catherine. This isn't the place for legal discussions, Hutchkins. No, I thought church was exactly the place to discuss morality and propriety. Hutchkins looked around at the gathered crowd, ensuring he had an audience. Isn't it interesting how Mrs. Thornton and Mr. Morrison are always together? How they live on the same property, work side by side from dawn to dusk. One might wonder about the nature of their partnership. One might wonder why you're so interested in other people's business, Catherine said coldly. Unless you have nothing better to occupy your time. Several people in the crowd chuckled, and Hutchkins' face flushed. I'm interested because I'm a concerned neighbor. A woman of your position alone with an unmarried man. It's scandalous. And when the judge hears about it, he'll have serious questions about your moral character. Sheriff Warren stepped forward. That's enough, Hutchkins. I'm just speaking the truth, Sheriff. Truth shouldn't be silenced just because it's uncomfortable. You're speaking malicious gossip designed to damage a lady's reputation, Warren said firmly. That's slander, and I won't have it in my town. Hutchkins smiled. Slander requires falsehood, Sheriff. I'm simply stating facts. Mrs. Thornton and Mr. Morrison lived together. They worked together. They were seen riding back from an auction yesterday alone together. These are facts. We're business partners, Jake said, his voice hard as iron. Everything we've done has been proper and above board. If you're suggesting otherwise, say it plain so I can call you a liar to your face. The crowd went silent. Calling a man a liar was serious business in Texas. It was the kind of accusation that ended in gunfire more often than not. Hutchkins's smile faded. I'm suggesting nothing. I'm simply pointing out that appearances matter, Morrison. And the appearance is that you and Mrs. Thornton have an inappropriate relationship. Then maybe, Reverend Reynolds said, his voice cutting through the tension, the solution is to make the relationship appropriate. All eyes turned to the Reverend. He looked at Jake and Catherine with a thoughtful expression. You're business partners, correct? Working together to build Sweetwater Springs into a profitable ranch. Yes, Catherine said carefully. And you're living on the same property which has created concern among some members of the community about propriety. Apparently so, Jake said. Then perhaps a marriage would solve the problem. Not a marriage of convenience, mind you, but a proper union that reflects your partnership and protects Mrs. Thornton's reputation. Reynolds looked between them. It's not uncommon on the frontier. Many successful marriages begin as practical arrangements and grow into something more. The suggestion hung in the air like smoke. Jake could feel every eye on them waiting for their response. Catherine's face had gone pale, her hands clenched so tight her knuckles were white. Martha Reynolds, blessed in her, stepped into the silence. That's a lovely idea, Samuel. But perhaps we shouldn't pressure these young people in public. It's a personal decision after all. Of course, Reynolds smiled apologetically. Forgive an old man's meddling. I simply hate to see good people suffer from unfair judgment. Hutchkins laughed sharp and mocking. A marriage of convenience. How romantic. I'm sure the judge will be very impressed by such a transparent ploy. At least it would be legal, Catherine said, her voice steady despite her obvious distress, which is more than can be said for your attempts to steal property that doesn't belong to you. Steal, I'm trying to prevent fraud. There's a difference. Hutchkins mounted his horse. Enjoy your last days at Sweetwater Springs, Mrs. Thornton. Or Miss Abbott, or whatever you're calling yourself this week. The judge rules Friday, and when he does, you'll be out on your ear. He rode off with his lawyers, leaving uncomfortable silence in his wake. The crowd began to disperse, some people avoiding Jake and Catherine's eyes, others offering sympathetic looks. Jake felt Catherine trembling beside him and wanted nothing more than to pull her into his arms. But that would only fuel the gossip. Come on, he said quietly. Let's go home. The ride back to Sweetwater Springs was silent and tense. Miguel rode ahead, giving them privacy, but Jake could feel the weight of unspoken words pressing down on them both. Finally, when they were safely back at the ranch, Catherine climbed down from the wagon and turned to face him. Is that what people really think, she asked, her voice small, that we're living in sin? Some people, the ones who listened to Hutchkins. And a marriage would fix that. Jake stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in her green eyes. It would make things legal, give you undeniable rights to the ranch, protect us both from Hutchkins' schemes. That's all very practical. Catherine looked up at him. But what about what we talked about last night, about falling for each other? Does that factor into this decision, or is marriage just another business arrangement? I don't know, Jake admitted. Part of me says we should wait, let our feelings develop naturally, not rush into something because Hutchkins is forcing our hand. But another part says that waiting might cost us everything. If Hutchkins wins on Friday, you lose the ranch. And I lose you. Catherine's breath caught. You'd lose me. Where would you go if the judge rules against you? Back to Boston where you have nothing, to another town to try again as a mail-order bride. Jake's hands came up to frame her face. I can't let that happen, Catherine. I know it's too soon. I know we barely know each other, but the thought of you leaving makes me feel like I'm drowning. Tears spilled down Catherine's cheeks. I don't want to leave. This place, this ranch, it's the first time I've felt like I belong somewhere. Like I matter. You do matter. To me, to Miguel, to this ranch. Jake wiped her tears with his thumbs. So marry me. Not because we have to, but because I want you to. Because I'm falling in love with you and I want to build a life together. A real life, not just a business arrangement. Jake, what if it's too fast? What if we regret it? Then we'll regret it together. But I'd rather take the risk with you than play it safe alone. He leaned his forehead against hers. I'm tired of being careful, Catherine. Tired of protecting my heart so much that I forget how to use it. You make me want to live again, really live. That's worth any risk. Catherine's hands came up to grip his shirt. I'm scared. Me too, but let's be scared together. She pulled back just enough to look into his eyes, searching for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her because she nodded. Yes, yes, I'll marry you, Jake Morrison. Not just for the ranch or to stop the gossip, but because I want to. Because you're the best man I've ever known, and I can't imagine facing whatever comes next without you beside me. Jake kissed her, then deep and thorough, pouring everything he felt into it. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers again. We should do it soon, he said, before Friday, before the judge rules. That way, no matter what Hutchins tries, you're legally protected as my wife. Tomorrow, I'll ride to town first thing, talk to Reverend Reynolds. If he'll marry us, we can do it tomorrow afternoon. Catherine laughed, the sound somewhere between bond and hysteria. That's fast, very fast. You want to wait? No, God help me, no. If we're doing this, let's do it right tomorrow. She kissed him again, quick and fierce. But tonight we tell Miguel. He deserves to know. They found Miguel in the barn tending to the horses. He looked up as they entered, his weathered face unreadable. Miguel, Jake said, Catherine and I are getting married. Tomorrow if Reverend Reynolds will do it. Miguel studied them both for a long moment, then broke into a rare smile. About time, boss. I was wondering when you would stop being stubborn and admit what everyone could see. Everyone could see, Catherine asked. Senora, blind men could see the way you look at each other, like the sun and the moon always circling, always drawn together. Miguel clapped Jake on the shoulder. This is good, very good. You both deserve happiness. Thank you, Miguel, Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion. That means a lot. Now what can I do to help with this wedding? They spent the evening making plans. Miguel would ride to town at first light to arrange things with Reverend Reynolds. Catherine would prepare the house, make it suitable for a small ceremony. Jake would handle the practical matters, making sure the ranch could spare them for a day. That night, lying in his narrow cabin bed, Jake stared at the ceiling and thought about what tomorrow would bring. Marriage. To a woman he'd known for less than 2 weeks. It was insane, reckless, everything his practical nature usually guarded against. But it also felt right, more right than anything had in years. Catherine challenged him, excited him, made him want to be better. She saw him not as a failure who'd lost everything, but as a partner worth building a future with. And tomorrow she'd be his wife. The thought terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. Miguel returned the next morning with good news. Reverend Reynolds would perform the ceremony at 2 o'clock that afternoon. He'd also spread the word among the more sympathetic members of the congregation, and several people had expressed interest in attending. We'll have witnesses, Miguel reported. The sheriff, Arthur Reynolds, a few ranchers who respect you both. Not a big wedding, but respectable. Catherine emerged from the house wearing a dress Jake had never seen before. It was cream-colored silk, simple but elegant, with her auburn hair pinned up and a few loose curls framing her face. She looked beautiful and terrified. Is this appropriate? She asked. It's not white, but it's the nicest dress I have. You're perfect, Jake said, and meant it. The hours until 2 o'clock crawled by. Jake changed into the borrowed suit, tried to calm his racing heart, failed miserably. This was nothing like his wedding to Sarah. That had been planned for months with a big celebration and everyone they knew in attendance. This was hurried and small, and born of necessity as much as desire. But when Jake stood at the altar and watched Catherine walk down the aisle of the small church, none of that mattered. She was there. She was choosing him. And that was everything. Sheriff Warren stood as witness, along with Martha Reynolds and two ranchers Jake had known for years. Miguel stood beside Jake, solid and supportive. Reverend Reynolds smiled at them both with genuine warmth. "Dearly beloved," Reynolds began, and Jake tried to focus on the words instead of the pounding of his heart. The ceremony was simple and brief. Traditional vows, no frills. When it came time for Jake to say, "I do," his voice was steady and sure. Catherine's was softer, but equally certain. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reynolds said. "Jake, you may kiss your bride." Jake cupped Catherine's face in his hands and kissed her gently, reverently, sealing the promise they'd just made. When he pulled back, Catherine's eyes were wet with tears, but she was smiling. "Hello, husband," she whispered. "Hello, wife." The small group of witnesses applauded, and Martha Reynolds embraced Catherine warmly. "Welcome to the family, dear. You'll do well here, I can tell." After signing the marriage certificate, Jake and Catherine stepped outside into the bright afternoon sun. And that's when they saw him. Hutchkins sat on his horse across the street, flanked by his two lawyers. He'd been watching, waiting. His face was twisted with rage. "Very clever, Morrison," Hutchkins called out. "Rush a wedding through before Friday's hearing. Think that'll save you?" "It's legal," Sheriff Warren said, stepping forward. "They're married in the eyes of God and the law. That makes Mrs. Morrison the legitimate owner of Sweetwater Springs. We'll see what the judge says about that. A marriage that convenient, that rushed. Looks like fraud to me." Jake felt Catherine tense beside him, but before either of them could respond, Reverend Reynolds spoke up. "Mr. Hutchkins, I performed this ceremony and I can assure you it was conducted with proper intent and full legal standing. These two young people love each other. Anyone with eyes can see that." "Love," Hutchkins spat the word like a curse. "They barely know each other. And yet they've built more together in 2 weeks than you've built alone in 20 years, Reynolds said calmly. "Perhaps that tells you something about the strength of their partnership." Hutchkins' face went red. "You'll regret this, all of you. When the judge rules in my favor on Friday, Mrs. Morrison will find herself married to a penniless cowboy and living in a shack. Let's see how long your love lasts then." He spurred his horse and rode off, his lawyers following. Jake pulled Catherine close, feeling her shake. "It's all right," he murmured. "We knew he'd fight this." "But what if he wins?" Catherine looked up at him, fear naked in her eyes. "What if the judge rules the will invalid? Then we'll figure something else out. Together." Jake kissed her forehead. "That's what marriage means, right? Facing whatever comes as a team." Sheriff Warren approached them. "For what it's worth, I think you've got a strong case. The will clearly states Richard's intent. Your marriage strengthens that. But Hutchkins has expensive lawyers and a lot of influence in this territory." "What do you suggest?" Jake asked. "Get your own affairs in order. Make sure all your paperwork is solid. And maybe talk to some of the other ranchers, the ones who've been hurt by Hutchkins' water monopoly. If they'll speak up about his tactics, it might sway the judge." It was good advice. Jake thanked the sheriff, then turned to Catherine. "We should get back to the ranch, start preparing for Friday." The ride home should have been joyful. They were newlyweds after all. But the shadow of Hutchkins' threat hung over them like a storm cloud. When they reached Sweetwater Springs, Miguel had already prepared a simple dinner in the main house. "Congratulations," he said, raising a glass of whiskey. "To the boss and the new senora. May you have many years of happiness." They drank to that, though Jake could taste the fear beneath the celebration. "Show you your room," Catherine said. "I show you your room," Catherine said. "I mean our room, if you want to share. Or you can stay in the cabin if you prefer. I don't want to presume." Jake caught her hand. "Catherine, we're married now. I'd like to share a room with my wife, if that's all right with you." Pink colored her cheeks. "It's more than all right." Catherine's bedroom was large and feminine, decorated in soft greens and creams. The bed was big enough for two, covered in a quilt that looked handmade. Jake felt suddenly out of place in his borrowed suit, too rough and worn for this refined space. "I'll try not to track dirt everywhere," he said. Catherine laughed, some of the tension breaking. "Jake, I've spent the last week covered in dust and hay. I think I can handle a little dirt." She moved to him, her hands coming up to loosen his tie. Besides, this is our room now. Not just mine, you don't have to worry about being proper or careful. Jake caught her hands, stilling them. I want tonight to be right for you, Phil. Not rushed or awkward. We've had enough rushed decisions. Then take your time. Catherine smiled up at him. We have all night. All our lives, actually. Jake kissed her, then slow and deep, taking her advice to heart. There was no need to rush, no need to hurry. They were married. They had time to learn each other, to discover what pleased and comforted. And when they finally came together, it was with tenderness and care, two broken people finding wholeness in each other. Later, lying in the darkness with Catherine's head on his chest, Jake felt something shift inside him. For the first time since Sarah died, he felt like he had a future worth living. Not just surviving day to day, but actually building towards something. Someone. I love you, he said into the quiet. Catherine stirred, propping herself up to look at him. I love you too. I know it's fast and probably crazy, but I do. Then we're both crazy. I can live with that. They fell asleep tangled together, and for one night the troubles waiting for them didn't matter. Friday arrived too quickly. Jake woke before dawn, Catherine still sleeping beside him, and allowed himself a moment to just watch her. The way her auburn hair spread across the pillow, the peaceful expression on her face, the gentle ice and fall of her breathing. His wife. The words still felt strange and wonderful. Miguel had coffee ready when Jake emerged from the house. Big day, boss. Yeah, Jake accepted the cup gratefully. You think we'll win? Think you have truth won in your side. That counts for something. And if it's not enough, Miguel was quiet for a moment. Then we fight, however we must. Catherine joined them a half hour later, dressed in her finest traveling suit, her face pale but composed. Together, the three of them rode to town where the hearing would be held in the small courthouse. The courtroom was packed. Ranchers, townspeople, anyone with an interest in the outcome had come to watch. Hutchkins sat at one table with his two fancy lawyers. Jake and Catherine sat at another with Sheriff Warren beside them, since they couldn't afford legal representation. Judge Harrison Blackwell was an older man, gray-haired and stern-faced, known for being fair but hard. He took his seat at the bench and surveyed the room with sharp eyes. This hearing concerns the estate of Richard Thornton, deceased, and the validity of his will. Mr. Hutchkins is contesting the bequest to Mrs. Catherine Morrison, formerly Abbott, on grounds of fraud and improper influence. Mrs. Morrison claims she is the rightful heir as Mr. Thornton's intended bride. The judge looked at both parties. Mr. Hutchkins, you may present your case first. Hutchkins' lead lawyer stood, a smooth man with city manners and a sharp suit. Your Honor, this case is simple. Miss Abbott, as she was, then arrived in Texas claiming to be Mr. Thornton's mail-order bride. However, no marriage took place. Mr. Thornton died before Miss Abbott arrived, making their engagement null and void. Therefore, the will's bequest to his wife is invalid, as no wife existed. The will says future wife, Sheriff Warren interjected. Intent is clear. Intent is not law, Sheriff, the lawyer said smoothly. The legal fact is that no marriage occurred. Furthermore, Miss Abbott's hasty marriage to Mr. Morrison, occurring just days before this hearing, suggests a pattern of opportunistic behavior. She seeks to profit from an inheritance she has no legal right to. The judge looked at Catherine. Mrs. Morrison, do you have proof of your engagement to Mr. Thornton? Catherine stood, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. Yes, Your Honor. I have 6 months of correspondence with Mr. Thornton in which he proposed marriage, and I accepted. I have the contract we both signed agreeing to the terms of our union, and I have my train ticket and receipts showing I traveled here in good faith to fulfill that agreement. She produced the documents and the judge examined them carefully. Hutchkins' lawyer tried to object, but the evidence was clear. Richard Thornton had intended to marry Catherine Abbott. The engagement was real and documented. What about the marriage to Mr. Morrison? The judge asked. That does seem rather convenient, occurring just 3 days before this hearing. Jake stood, his height and presence commanding attention. Your Honor, and I won't lie and say the timing wasn't influenced by this hearing. But Catherine and I didn't marry for legal strategy. We married because we're partners in business and in life. We've been working Sweetwater Springs together, building something real. The marriage just made official what was already true. Can you prove that? Ask anyone in this territory. They'll tell you we've been working side by side since the day Catherine arrived. that we bought my old ranch together at auction, that we've hired hands and made improvements and treated each other with respect and partnership. Jake's voice rang with conviction. I love my wife, Your Honor. I married her because I can't imagine my life without her. The legal benefits were secondary. Hutchins stood up, his face red with rage. This is ridiculous. They barely know each other. Morrison was a failed rancher drowning in debt, and suddenly this rich woman appears and he sees an opportunity. Mr. Hutchins, sit down, the judge said sharply. No, I won't sit quietly while these two commit fraud. Hutchins pointed at Jake. You want to know the truth about Morrison? He's cursed. Everything he touches dies. His wife died in childbirth because he was too stubborn to live near a doctor. His ranch failed because he couldn't manage it properly. And now he's attached himself to Mrs. Thornton like a parasite feeding off her money and property. The courtroom erupted in angry murmurs. Jake felt Catherine's hand find his squeezing tight. His jaw clenched, old guilt rising up to choke him. But before Jake could respond, a voice rang out from the back of the courtroom. That's a lie. Everyone turned. An old rancher named Thomas Garrett stood up, his weathered face hard with anger. I've known Jake Morrison since he was a boy. Watched him build his ranch from nothing after his father died. He worked harder than any three men, treated his animals right, treated people right. The drought killed his ranch, not incompetence. The drought that's killing all our ranches. Another rancher stood, and his wife Sarah died because the doctor was at Hutchins' place tending to his wife's flu. Morrison rode through the night to fetch him, but the doctor said Hutchins told him to wait until morning. So maybe Hutchins should examine his own role in Sarah Morrison's death before casting stones. A shocked silence fell. Jake's head spun. Hutchins had kept the doctor from coming. It couldn't be true. Could it? Hutchins' face had gone white. That's a lie. I never did any such thing. I was there, the old rancher said quietly. I was helping with your fencing that week. I heard the whole conversation. You told Doc Jameson that your wife's flu was more serious than some ranch woman's pregnancy complications. You told him to wait until morning. And Sarah Morrison died that night, another voice added, along with her baby. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Jake couldn't breathe, couldn't think. For 2 years, he'd blamed himself for Sarah's death, for living too far from town, for not getting the doctor in time. But if Hutchins had deliberately kept the doctor away, then Sarah's death wasn't an accident. It was negligence, cruelty. Catherine's hand tightened on his, grounding him. Jake, breathe. Judge Blackwell banged his gavel. Order, I will have order in this courtroom. He glared at Hutchins. Mr. Hutchins, these are serious allegations. Do you have a response? Hutchins seemed to realize he'd lost control of the situation. The doctor came to my home first, that's all. I didn't force him to stay. If he chose to prioritize my wife's care, that was his professional judgment. But you did ask him to wait until morning before going to the Morrison Ranch, the judge pressed. Hutchins's silence was answer enough. The judge's expression hardened. I've heard enough. Mr. Hutchins, your character is very much in question here. You've attacked Mr. Morrison's reputation while concealing your own role in a tragic death. You've called Mrs. Morrison a fraud while presenting no evidence beyond supposition and spite. And you've demonstrated a pattern of trying to control water rights in this territory through intimidation and manipulation. He turned to Catherine. Mrs. Morrison, I find your claim to Sweetwater Springs to be valid. Richard Thornton clearly intended for you to be his wife and heir. That you married Mr. Morrison instead does not invalidate that intent. It simply transfers the property to you and your husband, jointly as is proper in marriage. The ranch is yours. Relief flooded through Jake so intensely he had to sit down. Catherine's hand gripped his so tight it hurt, but he didn't care. They'd won. Against all odds, they'd won. Furthermore, the judge continued, I'm issuing an order preventing Mr. Hutchins from attempting to purchase Sweetwater Springs or any adjacent property for the next 5 years. Your monopolistic behavior is detrimental to this community, sir. Consider this a warning. For this. Hutchins shot to his feet. You can't do that. I have rights. And you've abused them. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel came down with finality. Hutchins stood frozen, his lawyers already gathering papers to leave. Then without another word, he stormed from the courtroom. The other ranchers crowded around Jake and Catherine, offering congratulations and support. Thomas Garrett clasped Jake's shoulder. "I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner, son, about what Hutchkins did. I thought you knew, thought you blamed him already. Didn't realize you were carrying that guilt alone." Jake's throat was too tight to speak. He just nodded. Sheriff Warren appeared beside them. "Congratulations, both of you. Justice was served today." "Thank you, Sheriff," Catherine said, her voice unsteady, "for everything." Outside the courthouse, Jake and Catherine stood in the late afternoon sun, still processing what had happened. They'd won. Sweetwater Springs was legally theirs. Hutchkins had been exposed and restricted. Sarah's death had been, if not avenged, at least explained. "Are you all right?" Catherine asked quietly. Jake thought about it. The revelation about Hutchkins keeping the doctor away had cracked open old wounds, but it had also freed him from blame he'd been carrying unfairly. Sarah's death wasn't his fault. It was tragedy compounded by one man's callousness. "I will be," he said. "It's a lot to take in." "We should go home." Catherine leaned against him. "Our home." They rode back to Sweetwater Springs in a daze, Miguel whooping with joy when they told him the news. That evening, the three of them sat on the porch and watched the sunset over land that was truly theirs. "What now?" Catherine asked. "We've won the ranch. What's next?" Jake thought about it. They had the land, the water, each other. They could build something real here, something lasting. "We make this place everything it can be," he said. "We help the other ranchers survive the drought. We share the water-build community. We create the life we both want. Together. Always together." That night, lying in their bed, Catherine turned to Jake with a serious expression. "I need to tell you something. About why I really agreed to be a mail-order bride." Jake waited, giving her space to find the words. "My father didn't just go bankrupt. He was going to kill himself. I found the gun, found the note he'd written. He couldn't bear the shame of losing everything, of letting down the family." Catherine's voice shook. "So I made a bargain with him. I'd marry Richard Thornton, use the money he sent for my passage to pay off the most pressing debts. In exchange, my father had to promise to keep living, to keep fighting." She looked at Jake, tears streaming down her face. "But he died anyway. Heart attack 3 weeks after I left. I wasn't there. I was on a train to marry a stranger and my father died alone." Jake pulled her close, holding her while she cried. "You tried to save him. That's all anyone can do. But I failed." "No, you gave him hope when he had none. You sacrificed your own happiness for his. That's love, Catherine. The deepest kind." Jake kissed her temple. "And I think he'd be proud of you now. Proud of how you've built a new life, found strength you didn't know you had." Catherine clung to him. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm cursed too. Like Hutchkins said about you, everything I touch seems to bow or leave. You're not cursed, and neither am I. We're survivors." Jake tilted her face up to meet his eyes. "We've both lost people we loved. But we found each other. That's not a curse, Catherine. That's grace." They held each other in the darkness, two damaged souls, finding healing in shared pain and hope. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Word spread about the hearing, about Hutchkins' exposure and defeat. Several ranchers approached Jake and Catherine about water-sharing agreements, just as Catherine had suggested weeks ago. They formalized arrangements where neighboring ranchers could water their cattle at Sweetwater Springs in exchange for labor on fence repair, barn raising, and other projects. The community that formed around this cooperation was unlike anything Jake had experienced. Instead of every man for himself, they worked together, shared resources, supported each other through the continuing drought. And at the center of it all was Catherine, whose Eastern education and business sense helped structure fair agreements that benefited everyone. One evening, about 6 weeks after the hearing, Catherine came to find Jake in the barn. He was repairing a saddle, the leather work requiring concentration. She watched him for a moment, then spoke softly. "Jake, I need to tell you something." The tone in her voice made him set down his tools. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. At least I don't think so." Catherine moved closer, her hands clasped nervously. "I'm pregnant." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. Pregnant. A baby. His baby. Their baby. All the old fear came rushing back. Sarah's screams, the blood. the tiny coffin they'd buried beside her. What if history repeated? What if he lost Catherine the way he'd lost Sarah? Jake, Catherine's voice was small, uncertain. Please say something. He looked at her, really looked at her, saw the fear in her eyes that matched his own, but also hope, joy, the belief that this time would be different. I'm terrified, he admitted. Me too. But I'm also... Jake couldn't find words for the complex mix of emotions. Catherine, I want this child, I want a family with you, but I'm so scared of losing you. Catherine took his hands, placing them on her still flat stomach. You won't lose me. I'm strong, Jake. Stronger than Sarah, I think. No disrespect to her memory, but I grew up healthy and sturdy, and will have the best medical care money can buy. I'll go to Dallas if I have to find the best doctor available. We'll both go to Dallas, Jake said firmly. When the time comes, we'll make sure you have everything you need, every possible advantage. Then you're happy. Jake pulled her into his arms, holding her close. I'm terrified and thrilled and completely overwhelmed. But yes, I'm happy. So damn happy. They stood like that for a long time, Jake's hands protective on her stomach. Catherine's arms wrapped around him. A family. They were going to be a family. That night, as they lay in bed, Jake found himself thinking about the future in a way he hadn't in years. Not just tomorrow or next week, but years ahead. Teaching his child to ride, watching them grow, building a legacy that would outlast him. What should we name them? He asked into the darkness. Catherine stirred. If it's a girl, I'd like Sarah Hope. Sarah after your first wife Hope for what we found together. Jake's throat tightened. And if it's a boy? Thomas, after my father, and maybe Richard as a middle name for the man who brought us together, even if he never meant to. Sarah Hope Morrison or Thomas Richard Morrison. Jake tested the names. I like them both. Me too. 3 months later, on a November morning that dawned cool and clear, something miraculous happened. Jake woke to the sound of rain. Not just a sprinkle or a brief shower, but real rain. Heavy drops drumming on the roof, soaking into the parched earth. He bolted upright, hardly daring to believe it. Catherine, wake up. It's raining. Catherine sat up, her pregnancy just starting to show in a gentle curve of her belly. What? Rain, actual rain. They rushed to the window and threw it open. Cool, wet air poured in, carrying the scent of rain on dust. Jake laughed a sound of pure joy and pulled Catherine into his arms. The drought is breaking, he said. After 3 years, it's finally breaking. They ran outside in their night clothes, not caring who might see. Miguel emerged from the bunkhouse, grinning ear to ear. The three of them stood in the rain, faces turned up to the sky, letting the water soak them. Other ranchers appeared on their properties, emerging from homes to stand in the miracle of rain. Someone started whooping, and the sound spread across the valley. 3 years of drought, 3 years of dying hope, and now this. Relief, redemption, rain. Jake pulled Catherine close, one hand protective on her stomach where their child grew. She tilted her face up to his, rain streaming down her cheeks like tears. We made it, she said. We actually made it. We did more than that. Jake kissed her, tasting rain and joy and promise. We built something real, something that'll last. The rain continued for 3 days, soaking deep into the earth, filling dry creek beds, turning brown grass green. When it finally stopped, Texas looked reborn, and so did Jake Morrison. 9 months after that November rain, Catherine gave birth to their daughter in a hospital in Dallas, attended by the best doctor money could buy. The labor was long and difficult, but Catherine was strong just as she'd promised. And when Sarah Hope Morrison entered the world with a healthy cry, Jake felt something in his chest that had been broken for years finally heal. He held his daughter in his large calloused hands, marveling at her tiny perfection. Dark hair like his, green eyes like Catherine's. A perfect blend of both of them. Hello, little one, he whispered. Welcome to the world. Catherine watched from the bed, exhausted but radiant. She's beautiful. She's perfect. Jake carefully placed the baby in Catherine's arms, then sat beside them both. His family. His wife and daughter. The future he'd thought lost forever. In the years that followed, Sweetwater Springs became one of the most successful ranches in the territory. Jake and Catherine ran it together, true partners in every sense. They had 3 more children, a son named Thomas Richard, then twin girls they named Grace and Hope. The ranch expanded, prospered, became a cornerstone of the community. Miguel stayed on, eventually marrying a widow from town and raising her children alongside his own. The water-sharing agreements Catherine had pioneered became standard practice in the region, creating a network of cooperation that benefited everyone. And Hutchins. He left Texas shortly after the hearing, relocated to California, and was never heard from again. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Jake and Catherine stood on the porch of Sweetwater Springs, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Sarah Hope had married a good man and given them two beautiful grandchildren. Thomas Richard was running the day-to-day operations of the ranch. The twins were both married and starting families of their own. "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked, leaning against Jake's side. "Marrying me so quickly, building all this?" Jake thought about it, thought about that desperate day when a woman in a fancy carriage had driven up offering partnership, about the risks they'd taken, the battles they'd fought, the life they'd built from dust and drought and determination. "Not for 1 second," he said. "You saved me, Catherine, in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," she corrected, as she always did. "Yeah, we did." They stood in comfortable silence, two people who'd found each other when they needed it most, and built something that would outlast them both. Not just a ranch or a legacy, but a testament to what partnership and love could create. Jake Morrison had lost everything once. His first wife, his child, his ranch, his hope. But in losing it all, he'd found something greater. A second chance at life with a woman who challenged him, supported him, and loved him exactly as he was. And in the end, that was the only thing that truly mattered. Not the land or the water or the cattle, but the person standing beside you, holding your hand through drought and storm, through loss and triumph, through every moment of the life you built together. That was what turned a house into a home, a partnership into a marriage, survival into something worth surviving for. That was grace. That was hope. That was love. And Jake Morrison, once a broken man ready to give up, had found all three in the green eyes of a mail-order bride who became his partner, his wife, his everything. The rain had come. The drought had ended, and life, beautiful and complicated and absolutely worth living, had bloomed in the desert of his heart.